The morning glimmered towards dawn. An officer's hat, richly plumed, lay before me on the pavement. Cardilac's bloody deed, committed on the spot where I sat, rose clearly before me. Horrified, I ran away. Utterly confused, almost out of my mind, I sat in my attic. The door opened, and Cardillac walked in. "In Christ's name, what do you want?" I cried. Paying no attention whatever, he came up to me and smiled at me calmly with a geniality which increased my loathing. He pulled up an old stool and sat down beside me, so that I was unable to rise from the straw mattress onto which I had thrown myself. "Now, Olivier," he began, "how are you, poor lad? I was badly over-hasty when I threw you out of the house. I miss you at every turn. Just now I have some work in hand which I really cannot finish without your help. How would it be if you came back and worked in my shop again? You say nothing? Yes, I know I have offended you. I didn't wish to conceal from you that I was angry at your flirtation with my Madelon, but I have carefully considered the matter since then, and I find that with your skill, your diligence, and your loyalty, I could wish for no better son-in-law than you. Come with me, then, and see how you may win Madelon for your wife." Cardillac's words pierced my heart. I trembled at his wickedness. I was unable to utter a word. "You are hesitating," he continued sharply, his eyes flashing. "You are hesitating? Perhaps you cannot come with me today. You have other things to do. Perhaps you want to visit Desgrais or introduce yourself to Argenson or Larigny. Take care, my lad, that the claws you want to use to destroy others do not catch you yourself and tear you to pieces." At that my outraged feelings burst forth. "Let those," I cried, "who are conscious of gruesome crime feel the power of those names you have spoken. They do not affect me. I have nothing to do with them." "Indeed, Olivier," continued Cardillac, "it would be to your honour if you were to work alongside me, the most famous master of his time, highly regarded everywhere for trustworthiness and honesty, so that any evil slander would rebound heavily on the head of the slanderer. As regards Madelon, I must confess that you have her alone to thank for my indulgence. She loves you with an ardour such as I would never have believed possible in the gentle child. As soon as you had left, she threw herself at my feet, clasped my knees, and confessed amid 1,000 tears that she could not live without you. I thought she was imagining it, as is usual with infatuated young people, who are apt to want to die when the first baby face gives them a friendly look. But my Madelon did in fact become sick and ill, and when I tried to talk her out of the nonsense, she called your name 100 times. What could I do if I did not want to see her give way to despair? Yesterday evening I told her I would consent to everything, and would fetch you today. Overnight she has blossomed like a rose, and is now waiting for you, beside herself with love and longing. May the eternal power of heaven forgive me, but I myself do not know how it happened that I was suddenly standing in Cardillac's house, that Madelon, crying aloud for joy, Olivier, my love, my husband," threw herself at me, flung both arms around me and pressed me to her bosom, that, overwhelmed by ecstasy, I swore by the Virgin and all the saints never, never to leave her. Deeply affected by the recollections of that moment, Olivier had to stop. Mademoiselle De Scudery, filled with horror at the crime of a man she had regarded as virtue and trustworthiness itself, cried, "It's dreadful! René Cardillac belongs to the band of murderers who have made our city a den of robbers for so long?" "Why do you say a band, mademoiselle?" asked Olivier. "There never has been such a band. It was Cardillac alone who sought and found his victims through the whole city. That it was he alone. Therein lay the safety with which he attacked, and the insuperable difficulty of tracking down the murderer. But let me continue. The sequel will explain to you the mystery of the wickedest and at the same time unhappiest of all men. The position in which I now found myself with the master is easy to imagine. I had taken the decisive step, and there was no going back. Sometimes it seemed to me as if I had even become Cardillac's assistant in murder. Only in Madelon's love could I forget the pain which tormented me. Only with her could I succeed in blotting out every trace of inexpressible grief. When I worked with her father in the workshop, I could not bring myself to look him in the face. I could scarcely speak for the horror which filled me whenever I was near that dreadful man, who acted the virtuous role for a true and tender father. of a good citizen, while night concealed his crimes. Madelon, the gay, angelic, spotless child, clung to him with idolatrous love. It pierced my heart when I considered that if ever revenge were to unmask the scoundrel, she, deceived by devilish cunning, must fall victim to the most atrocious despair. That alone kept my mouth closed, even though I had to risk the death of a criminal for it. Although I was able to learn much from the talk of the constables, Cardelac's crimes, their motive, the way they were carried out, were still a puzzle to me, but the explanation was not far away. One day, Cardelac, who to my disgust normally worked in the gayest of humours, joking and laughing, was very serious and engrossed in his thoughts. Suddenly, he threw down the jewellery on which he was working. The gems and pearls rolled all over the place. He stood up violently and said, "Olivier, things cannot go on like this between us. I find this relationship intolerable. What the cunning of Desgrais and his fellows could not discover, chance placed in your hands. You have seen me at my nocturnal work. My evil star drives me to it, and resistance is useless. It was your evil star, too, which had you follow me, which enveloped you in an impenetrable veil, which gave your footsteps the lightness of the smallest beast which wanders unheard, so that I, who can see as clearly as a tiger in the darkest night, who can perceive the smallest sound, the humming of a gnat, did not notice you. Your evil star, my young comrade, led you to me. Betrayal, as you now stand, is out of the question, so you might as well know everything." "Never will I be your comrade, you hypocritical villain," was what I wanted to cry. But the horror which gripped me at Cardelac's words choked me. Instead, I was able to utter only some incomprehensible sound. Cardelac sat down again on his workstool. He wiped the sweat from his brow. Moved by the memory of the past, he seemed to have difficulty in pulling himself together. At length he began. "Wise men often speak of the strange impressions which afflict pregnant women, and the strange influence these impressions from outside can have on the child. In the first month in which she was pregnant with me, she was, together with other women, watching a brilliant court festival in the Trianon. There her glance fell on a cavalier in Spanish dress, with a glittering, bejewelled chain about his neck from which he could scarcely tear her eyes away. Her whole being lusted after the sparkling stones, which seemed to her some heavenly treasure. Several years earlier, before my mother was married, this same cavalier had laid snares for her virtue, but had been rejected with horror. My mother recognized him, but this time he seemed to her in the gleam of the sparkling diamonds a being of a higher kind, the embodiment of everything beautiful. The cavalier noticed my mother's longing, fiery glances. Believing he might now be more fortunate, he found a way of approaching her, of enticing her away to a lonely place. There he clasped her passionately in his arms. My mother grasped the beautiful chain, but at the same instant he fell and dragged my mother with him to the ground. Whether it was a sudden heart attack or some other cause, suffice it to say that he was dead. My mother's efforts to free herself from the stiffened arms of the corpse were vain. His hollow eyes, their sight extinguished, fixed upon her. The dead man rolled on the ground with her. Her cries for help at last reached some distant passers-by, who hurried to her and rescued her from the arms of her gruesome lover. The horror of it threw my mother onto a sickbed. She and I were given up for lost, yet she recovered, and her delivery was better than anyone could have hoped for. But the fear of that terrible moment had got into me. My evil star had risen, and had sent down fires which kindled in me one of the strangest and most pernicious of passions. Even when I was very young, sparkling diamonds, golden jewellery, meant more to me than anything else. It was held to be a normal taste for a child, but it showed itself in other ways. As a boy, I stole gold and jewels whenever I could lay hands on them. As if I were the most experienced expert, I distinguished by instinct between paste and real gems. Only the latter enticed me. Imitations I left untouched. This unborn urge had to be suppressed in face of the cruelest punishments by my father. It was only so as to be able to handle gold and precious stones that I turned to the goldsmith's trade. I worked with passion, and soon became the first master of the art. Now there began a period in which my inborn urge, so long kept in check, burst forth and grew mightily, consuming everything around it. As soon as I had completed a piece of work and delivered it, I became agitated. I fell into a state of desperation which robbed me of my sleep, my health, of all my vital energies. The person for whom I was working stood before my eyes day and night like a ghost, adorned with my jewellery, and a voice whispered in my ear, "It is yours, really. It is yours, really. Take it, then. What do diamonds mean to a dead man?" Then I set myself to the art of thieves. I had access to the homes of the great, and I used every opportunity. No lock withstood my skill, and soon the jewellery I had made was again in my own hands. But even that did not dispel my agitation. That sinister voice still made itself heard. It mocked me and cried, "Ha ha! A dead man is wearing your jewels!" I myself do not know how it happened, but I developed an inexpressible hatred for those for whom I made jewellery. Yes, deep inside of me there grew a desire to murder them at which I myself quailed. It was about that time that I bought this house. I had come to terms with the owner. We were sitting here, in this room, pleased with the business we had transacted, and were drinking a bottle of wine. Night had fallen, and I wanted to be going. Then my vendor said, "Listen, Master René, before you go, I must let you into a secret about this house." With that, he opened a cupboard let into the wall, pushed open the rear wall, stepped into a small chamber, bent down, and lifted a trapdoor. We descended a steep, narrow staircase, came to a doorway which he opened, and stepped outside into the yard. Now the old gentleman walked over to the wall, pressed a piece of iron which projected only very slightly, and immediately a section of the wall swung out, so that a man could comfortably nip through the opening and get out into the street. You might like to see the device sometime, Olivier, which was probably made by the crafty monks of the cloister, which used to be here, so that they could slip in and out in secret. It is a piece of wood, mortared and whitewashed only on the outside, into which a statue has been fixed. Again, only of wood, but looking like stone, and which turns together with the statue on concealed hinges. Dark thoughts arose within me when I saw this contrivance. It seemed to me a preparation for such deeds as even to me still remained a secret. I had just delivered to a gentleman of the court some rich jewellery which I knew was intended for a dancer at the opera. The mortal torments did not fail to appear. The spirit dogged my footsteps. The whispering Satan was at my ear. I moved into my new house, bathed in a cold sweat. Sleeplessly I tossed and turned on the bed. In my mind's eye I saw the man gliding off to the dancer with my jewels. Filled with rage, I jumped up, threw on my cloak, descended the secret stairway out through the wall into the runic case. He came. I fell upon him. He cried out, yet firmly seizing him from behind, I stabbed him through the heart with my dagger. The jewels were mine. This done, I felt a peace, a happiness in my soul as never before. The ghost had disappeared. The voice of Satan was silent. Now I knew what my evil star desired. I had to give in to it, or be destroyed. Now, Olivier, you can understand all my actions. Do not believe that because I must do what I cannot help doing, I have renounced all feeling of pity, of compassion, which adheres to the nature of man. You know how difficult it has become for me to deliver up jewellery, how for many whose death I do not desire I will not work, Indeed how, even though I know that only bloodshed will banish my apparition tomorrow, I still settle tonight for a hard punch, which stretches the owner of my gems out on the ground and delivers them into my hands. Having said all this, Cardillac led me into his secret vault and granted me the sight of his jewel cabinet. The king possesses nothing finer. On every piece of jewellery there hung a ticket marked with the name of the person for whom it was made, and when it had been taken by theft, robbery, or murder. "On your wedding day, Olivier," said Cardillac, gloomy and solemn, "you shall swear to me a sacred oath, with your hand on the image of Christ on the cross, that as soon as I am dead you will reduce all these riches to dust by a means which I shall make known to you. I do not want any human being, least of all Madelon and you, to come into possession of a hoard which has been purchased with blood. Caught in this labyrinth of crime, torn between love and loathing, between delight and horror, I was like a man in hell, whom a lovely angel calls up on high with a gentle smile. But Satan keeps firmly grasped with burning claws, so that the angel's loving smile, in which is all the blessedness of high heaven, becomes for him the grimmest of his torments. I thought of running away, indeed, of suicide. But Madelon, rebuke me, blame me, my dear mademoiselle, for being too weak to conquer a passion which fettered me to the crime. But am I not making amends for it by a shameful death?" One day, Cardillac came home in an unusually happy mood. He hugged Madelon, threw me the friendliest of glances, drank a bottle of fine wine at table, which he was wont to do only on high days and holidays, sang and rejoiced. Madelon had left us alone. I was about to go into the workshop. "Sit down, my boy," cried Cardillac. "No more work today. Let us have another drink to the health of the worthiest, the most admirable lady in Paris." After I had drunk a toast with him, and he had emptied a full glass, he said, "Tell me, Olivier, how do you like this verse? Un amant qui craint les voleurs n'est pas digne d'amour." He then told me what had transpired in the apartment of Madame de Maintenon between you and the king, and added that he had always respected you more than any other human being, and that, gifted as you were with such virtue that his evil star faded and was powerless before it, even if you were wearing the most beautiful jewellery ever made by him, it would never raise any evil spirit or murderous thought within him. "Listen, Olivier," he said, "to what I have decided. Some long time ago I had to make a necklace and bracelets for Henrietta of England, and I even had to supply the stones for them. The work succeeded like none other, but it tore me apart when I thought of having to part with those jewels which had become my heart's treasure. You know of the princess's unfortunate assassination. I kept the jewels, and now I want to send them to Mademoiselle De Scudery as a token of my respect and gratitude. I shall do so in the name of the supposed band of murderers. Thus I shall mock Desgrais and his companions as they deserve. You shall bear the jewels to her." As soon as Cardillac spoke your name, mademoiselle, it was as if a veil had been drawn away and the picture of my happy childhood emerged in bright, shining colours. A wonderful comfort crept into my soul, a ray of hope dispelling the dark spirits. Cardillac must have noticed the impression his words had made on me, and interpreted them in his own way. "My plan," he said, "seemed to suit you. I can confess that a deep inward voice, quite different from the one which demands bloody acts like a ravenous beast of prey, has commanded me to do this. Sometimes I get a strange feeling, an inner anxiety, the fear of something dreadful." Crossfade. "My plan," he said, "seems to suit you. I can confess that a deep inward voice, quite different from the one which demands bloody acts like a ravenous beast of prey, has commanded me to do this. Sometimes I get a strange feeling, an inner anxiety, the fear of something dreadful, the terror of which drifts in from the beyond and catches me in its grasp. It then seems to me as if what my evil star has done through me can be put right by my immortal soul, which has no part in it. It was in such a mood that I resolved to make a diamond crown for the Holy Virgin in the Church of St. Eustace, but then that incomprehensible fear overcame me whenever I wanted to start the work, so that I left it altogether. Now it seems to me as if I am making a humble sacrifice to virtue and piety itself, and begging for its intercession by sending to Mademoiselle De Scudery the most beautiful jewellery I have ever made. Cardillac, who was aware of your mode of life, mademoiselle, down to the last detail, now told me how and when I was to deliver the jewels, which he enclosed in a little box. My whole being was ecstatic, for heaven itself was showing me through the sinful Cardillac how to save myself from the hell in which I languished. So I thought. In quite another sense than Cardillac, I wanted to get into you. As Anne Brusson's son, as your foster child, I thought to throw myself at your feet and reveal all to you. Moved by an unutterable distress which the poor innocent Madelon was threatened with by its revelation, you would have kept the secret, but you would have found a sure means of restraining Cardillac's vile wickedness without its being revealed. Do not ask me what you would have done. I do not know. But that you would save Madelon and me. Of this I was as firmly convinced in my soul as I was of the comfort and aid of the Holy Virgin. You know, mademoiselle, that my intentions that night miscarried. I did not lose hope of being more fortunate some other time. Then Cardillac suddenly lost all his gaiety. He crept about miserably, stared in front of him, muttered incomprehensibly, fought with his hands as if parrying some enemy. His spirit seemed tormented by evil thoughts. He behaved in this way for a whole morning. Finally he sat down at the workbench, leapt up again in an ill humour, gazed out of the window, and said in a serious and gloomy voice, "How I wish Henrietta of England could have worn my jewels." His words filled me with terror. Now I knew that his errant spirit was again in the grip of the dreadful murderous spectre, that Satan's voice was again loudly at his ears. I saw your life threatened by the murderous devil. If only Cardillac had his jewels back in his hands again, you would be saved. The danger grew with every moment. Then I met you on the Pont Neuf, managed to get through to your carriage, and threw you that note which begged you to take the jewellery you had received to Cardillac immediately. You failed to come. My anxiety turned to despair as the next day Cardillac spoke of nothing other than the jewels which had passed before his eyes in the night. I could only interpret that as meaning your jewels, and I grew certain that he was brooding on some murderous plot which he was proposing to carry out that very night. I had to save you, even if it cost Cardillac his life. As soon as Cardillac had, as usual, shut himself away after evening prayers, I climbed through a window into the yard, slipped through the opening in the wall, and stationed myself in the shadows not far away. It was not long before Cardillac came out and slipped quietly down the street. I was behind him. He went towards the Rue Saint-Honoré. My heart trembled. Suddenly he disappeared from my view. I decided to stand by your door. Then an officer came along, singing and whistling, just as on previous occasions when fate had made me a witness of Cardillac's murderous deeds, who passed by without being aware of me. In the same instant a black figure leapt out and fell upon him. It was Cardillac. I tried to prevent the murder. With a loud cry I reached the spot in 2 or 3 bounds. It was Cardillac, not the officer, who, stabbed to death, fell to the ground with a gasp. The officer let the dagger fall, drew his sword from its sheath and positioned himself, believing I was the assassin's accomplice, ready to fight me off, but he hurried quickly away when he realized that, unconcerned with him, I was only examining the body. Cardillac was still alive. After I had picked up the dagger the officer had dropped, I loaded him onto my shoulders and dragged him back home, through the secret passage and up into the workshop. You know the rest. You see, mademoiselle, that my only crime is not turning Madelon's father over to the court and so making an end of his crimes. I am untouched by any blood guilt. No torture will ever force from me the secret of Cardillac's crimes. I will not have, in defiance of the eternal power which has concealed from the virtuous daughter her father's gruesome guilt, The whole terrible past now break in upon her, earthly revenge disinter the body from the earth which covers it, the hangman brand the rotting bones with disgrace. No! My beloved will mourn for me as for a fallen innocent. Time will ease her pain, but she could never recover from grief at the hellish deeds of her beloved father." Olivier fell silent. Then suddenly a stream of tears erupted from his eyes. He threw himself at Mademoiselle Scudery's feet and implored, "You are convinced of my innocence. Have pity on me. Tell me how Madelon is." Mademoiselle Scudery called Martiniere, and in a few moments Madelon flung herself about Olivier's neck. "Now everything is all right since you are here. I knew it. I knew that the noblest of women would save you." So Madelon cried again and again, and Olivier forgot his destiny, everything which threatened him. He was free and happy. Tenderly they rehearsed to one another what they had suffered, and embraced again and wept for joy that they had again found one another. Had not Mademoiselle Scudery already been convinced of Olivier's innocence, she must now have been compelled to believe in it, as she saw the pair in the bliss of their love, forgetting the world, and their misery, and their nameless suffering. "No," she cried, "only a pure heart is capable of such blissful oblivion." The rays of morning broke through the window. Desgrais tapped on the door of the apartment, and told them it was time to take Broussons back to prison. The lovers had to part. The forebodings which had filled Mademoiselle Scudery since Brousson's entry into her house had now become reality. She saw the son of her beloved Anne innocently ensnared in such a fashion it seemed impossible he could be saved from a humiliating death. She admired the youth's heroic spirit, which would rather die laden with guilt than betray a secret which would bring death to his Madelon. Within the whole world of possibility she could see no way of rescuing the poor young man from the cruel court, and yet it was firmly fixed in her soul that she must shun no sacrifice to prevent the appalling injustice which was being done. She worried herself with plans and designs, some of which she discarded as quickly as she formed them. Every glimmer of hope began to disappear until she was on the point of despair. But Madelon's childlike, innocent trust, the radiance with which she spoke of how her beloved, acquitted of all guilt, would soon make her his wife, deeply moved Mademoiselle Scudery. Finally, to do something, Mademoiselle Scudery wrote a long letter to Larégnier, in which she told him that Olivier Broussons had proved to her his innocence of Cardilac's death. Only his heroic decision to take with him to the grave a secret the revelation of which would destroy innocence and virtue itself prevented him from making a confession to the court which would free him from suspicion. All that burning zeal, that eloquence could do, Mademoiselle Scudery summoned up to prevail over Larégnier's hard heart. In a few hours Larégnier replied that he would be heartily glad if Broussons had justified himself to his most worthy benefactress. As regards his heroic decision to take with him to the grave a secret which had some bearing on the deed, he was sorry, but the Chambre Ardente could not respect such heroism, but would, rather, have to endeavour to break the same by the most forcible means. In 3 days' time he hoped to be in possession of the secret, which would no doubt bring to light many marvels. Mademoiselle Scudery knew only too well what Larégnier meant. Now it was certain that torture was to be inflicted. In her mortal fear, it at length occurred to Mademoiselle Scudery that merely to obtain a postponement, the advice of a legal expert would be of service. Pierre Arnaud d'Andilly was at that time the most famous advocate in Paris. His knowledge and understanding were equal to his integrity and virtue. Mademoiselle Scudery betook herself to him and told him everything, so far as that was possible without betraying Brousson's secret. She believed that d'Andilly would eagerly adopt the cause of the innocent, but her hopes were bitterly disappointed. He listened calmly to everything and then replied, smiling, with Boileau's words, "La vraie peut quelquefois n'être pas vraisemblable." He demonstrated that the most obvious grounds for suspicion told against Broussons, that Larégnier's proceedings could in no way be called cruel or precipitate, but were quite in accordance with the law, He could not, indeed, act otherwise without violating the duties of a judge. He, Dandie, did not believe he could save Brousson from torture even by the most skilful defence. Only Brousson himself could do that, either by a straightforward confession or by a detailed account of the circumstances surrounding Cardilac's death, which would then perhaps offer some reason for fresh investigations.
"Then I shall throw myself at the king's feet and beg for mercy,"
said Mademoiselle Scudery, quite beside herself and in a voice half choked with tears. "No," cried Dandie. "In heaven's name, don't do that, mademoiselle. Save that as a last resort, for if it should fail, it is lost to you forever. The king will never pardon a criminal of this sort. The approaches of the public would be levelled against him. It is possible that by disclosing his secret, or in some other way, Brousson will find the means of dispelling the suspicion against him. Then will be the time to beg for the king's mercy, for then he will not ask what has or has not been proved before the court, but will consult his own inner convictions." Mademoiselle Scudery had perforce to concur. Lost in the depths of grief, brooding and reflecting on what she should now attempt in order to save the unhappy Brousson, she was sitting in her apartment late in the evening when Martinière entered and announced Count Miosson, colonel of the King's Guard, who urgently wished to speak to her.
"Forgive me, mademoiselle,"
said Miosson, bowing in a soldierly way,
"for disturbing you so late, at such an inconvenient time. We soldiers know no better, and besides, a few words shall be my excuse. Olivier Brousson brings me to you."
Mademoiselle Scudery, tense as to what she should now learn, cried,
"Olivier Brousson? That most unfortunate of men? What have you to do with him?"
"I thought," said Miosson, smiling, "that your protégé's name would succeed in procuring me a hearing. The whole world is convinced of Brousson's guilt. I know that you are of another opinion, though, as I have heard it said, your opinion is founded only on the protestations of the accused. With me it is different. No one could be more convinced than I of Brousson's innocence of Cardilac's death."
"Go on! Oh, go on!"
cried Mademoiselle Scudery, her eyes shining with joy.
"It was I," said Miosson with emphasis, "who stabbed the goldsmith in the Rue Saint-Honoré, not far from your house."
"By all the saints! You!"
cried Mademoiselle Scudery.
"And," Miosson continued, "I swear to you, mademoiselle, I am proud of my deed. Cardillac was the wickedest, most hypocritical scoundrel that ever existed, who murdered and robbed by night, and for so long eluded all attempts at capture. I do not know how it happened that some suspicion arose within me against the villain, when, visibly agitated, he brought the jewellery I had ordered, inquired precisely for whom I intended it, and then questioned my valet as to when I was accustomed to visit a certain lady. At length it occurred to me that the victims of the assassin all carried the same death wound. I felt certain that the murderer was practised in delivering a blow that would kill instantly, that he depended on it. If the blow failed, then the fight was even. This led me to adopt a precaution so simple I cannot understand how others did not think of it long ago. I wore a light breastplate under my waistcoat. Cardillac fell upon me from behind. He gripped me with great strength, but his dagger stroke was deflected by the iron. In the same instant I wrested myself from him, and stabbed him in the chest with the dagger I held in readiness.
"And you have kept quiet?" asked Mademoiselle Scudery. "You did not tell the court of what happened?"
"Permit me, mademoiselle," Miosson continued, "to point out that such a deposition would involve me in the most hideous proceedings, if not in immediate ruin. Would La Reynière, who scents criminals everywhere, have believed me if I accused the honest Cardillac, the model of all piety and virtue, of being the sought-for murderer? What if the sword of justice had turned its point against me?"
"That would be impossible," said Mademoiselle Scudery. "Your birth, your rank—"
"Oh," Miosson went on, "think of the Duke of Luxembourg, who found himself under suspicion of poisoning and was taken to the Bastille because he had once had his horoscope cast by Lesage. No, by Saint-Denis, Not one single hour of freedom, not the lobe of my ear would I surrender to that lunatic Larigny, who would like to put his knife in all our throats."
"But you are thus bringing the innocent Broussons to the scaffold," Mademoiselle Scudery interrupted him.
"Innocent?"
Moisson replied.
"Innocent, mademoiselle? Do you call the wicked Cardilac's accomplice innocent? Who stood by him in his deeds? Who has served death 100 times? No, his blood will be justly spilt. I have disclosed to you, my esteemed mademoiselle, the true state of affairs on the assumption that without handing me over to the Chambre Ardente, you would know how to make use of my secret in some way or another for your protégé."
Mademoiselle Scudery, inwardly delighted at seeing her conviction of Brousson's innocence so decisively confirmed, did not hesitate to reveal all to the Count, who already knew of Cardilac's crimes, and to invite him to go with her to visit Dondilly. Everything would be disclosed to him under the seal of secrecy, and he would then advise as to what should be done. After Mademoiselle Scudery had related everything to him down to the last detail, Dondilly again queried the most trifling circumstances. In particular, he asked Count Miosson whether he was convinced it was Cardillac who had attacked him, and whether he could again recognize Broussons as the man who had dragged away Cardillac's body.
"Besides recognizing the goldsmith easily in the bright moonlight," Miosson replied, "I have even seen at Larigny's the dagger with which Cardillac was killed. It is mine, recognizable by the decorative work on the hilt. As I was standing only a pace away from him, I perceived all the features of the youth, whose hat had fallen off, and I would certainly be able to recognize him again."
Dondilly sat silently for a few moments, gazing before him. Then he said,
"Brousson cannot in any way now be saved from the hands of justice by the usual paths. He will not name Cardillac as the assassin for Madelon's sake. This makes no difference, for even if he were to succeed in proving it by revealing the secret exit and the stolen hoard, he would still face death as an accomplice. The same applies if Count Miosson discloses to the judges the incident with the goldsmith as it actually occurred. Postponement is the only thing we can consider. Count Miosson must go to the conciergerie, have Broussons brought before him and identify him as the person who made off with Cardillac's body. He must then hurry to Larigny and say, "I saw the man killed in the Rue Saint-Honoré. I was standing close beside the body when another man sprang out, bent over the body, lifted him, as he seemed still to be alive, onto his shoulders, and carried him off. I recognized that man as Olivier Brousson." This statement will allow Brousson's hearing to be reopened and bring about a confrontation with Count Miosson. The torture will not be applied, and further investigations can be made. Then is the time to turn to the king himself. It must be left to your acumen, mademoiselle, to find the best way of doing so. To my way of thinking, it would be a good thing to reveal the whole secret to the king. Brousson's confession is supported by the statement of Count Miosson. Secret investigations in Cardillac's house might do the same. No legal proceeding, but the king's decision, founded on the feeling that where the judge must punish, mercy may pardon, must govern our actions. Count Miosson did exactly as Dondilly had advised, and everything transpired as the latter had predicted. Now came the time to go to the king, and this was the most difficult part, since, holding him alone to be the robber and assassin who had for so long kept all Paris in fear, he harboured such a horror of Broussons that if reminded of the proceedings against him, he flew into a rage. Madame de Maintenon, true to her principle of never talking to the king of anything unpleasant, refused mediation, so Brousson's fate was laid squarely in the hands of Mademoiselle Scudery. After lengthy meditation, she came to a decision and put it quickly into execution. She clad herself in a black dress of heavy silk, adorned herself with Cardillac's jewels, draped a long black veil over her shoulders, and appeared in this fashion in the apartments of Madame Maintenon at the hour when the king was present there. The noble figure of the worthy lady in this solemn garb possessed a majesty calculated to awaken awe even in those idle people used to drifting aimlessly in ante-rooms. Everyone stepped aside, and as she entered even the king stood up amazed and came towards her. The diamonds of the necklace and bracelets flashed before his eyes, and he cried, "By heaven, that is Cardilac's jewellery." Then turning to Madame Maintenon with a smile, he added, "Look, Madame Marquise, how our beautiful bride grieves for her bridegroom." "Nay, gracious lord," Mademoiselle Scudery said, as if continuing the joke, "how would it become a grief-stricken bride to bejewel herself so magnificently? No, I have severed all connection with that goldsmith, and would think no more of him, did not the horrible sight of his body borne past me appear from time to time before my eyes." "What?" asked the king. "You saw him?" Mademoiselle Scudery now related how fate had brought her to Cardilac's house, just as his murderer had been discovered. She described Madelon's wild grief, the deep impression which the angelic child had made on her, the way in which she had saved the poor girl from Desgrais' hands amid the cheers of the people. With ever-growing fervour, she now began her scenes with Laraigne, Desgrais, and Brusson himself. The king, carried away by the power of Mademoiselle Scudery's account, failed to notice that she was now speaking of the hateful proceedings against the evil Brusson. He could not utter a word, but occasionally gave vent to his emotions with an exclamation. He was quite beside himself at the scandal he was hearing of, and incapable of putting everything in order. Before he knew it, Mademoiselle Scudery was at his feet, begging for mercy for Olivier Brusson. "What are you doing?" the king exclaimed, grasping her with both hands and compelling her to sit in the armchair. "What are you doing, mademoiselle? You amaze me. This is indeed a terrible story. Who can vouch for the truth of Brusson's remarkable tale?" To which Mademoiselle Scudery replied, "Miosson's statement, the investigation in Cardilac's house, inner conviction, oh, Madelon's virtuous heart, which reorganizes the same virtue in the unfortunate Brusson." On the point of replying, the king turned at a sound from the direction of the door. Louvois, who was working in another apartment, looked in with a worried expression. The king rose and left the room, Louvois following. Both Mademoiselle Scudery and Madame Maintenon regarded this interruption with misgiving, for, having been surprised once, the king might be more wary a second time. But a few minutes later the king returned, paced the room quickly, then stood, his hands behind his back, before Mademoiselle Scudery, and, without looking at her, said half aloud, "I should like to see your Madelon." To which Mademoiselle Scudery rejoined, "Oh, my gracious sire, what great, great happiness you vouchsafe the poor unhappy child! Ah, it needs only a sign from you to see the little one at your feet." And then she tripped to the door as quickly as she could in the heavy dress and called that the king wished to have Madelon Cardillac brought before him. Then she returned and cried and sobbed for joy and emotion. She had anticipated such a favour and had therefore taken Madelon along with her, who had remained with one of the marquise's chambermaids, holding a short petition which Dandilly had drafted. In a few moments she lay speechless at the king's feet. Fear, bewilderment, awe, love, and pain drove the blood through the poor girl's veins. Her cheeks glowed crimson, her eyes sparkled with tears, which now and then fell through the silky lashes onto the lily-white bosom. The king appeared touched by the beauty of the angelic child. He raised her gently, then made a movement, as if he were going to kiss the hand he was holding. He let it go and regarded the child with moist eyes. Madame Maintenon whispered quietly to Mademoiselle Scudery, "Doesn't she look like Vallière, down to the last hair, the little dear? The king is wallowing in the sweetest of memories. Your gamble has paid off." Softly though Madame Maintenon said this, it seemed that the king had heard it. His face flushed. He glanced past Madame Maintenon, read the petition which Madelon tendered to him, and then said gently, "I can well believe that you, my dear child, are convinced of your loved one's innocence.
but we shall hear what the Chambre Ardente has to say about it."
A gentle movement of his hand dismissed the girl, who was about to dissolve into tears. Mademoiselle Scudery was aware, to her dismay, that the memory of Vallière, salutary though it had seemed at the outset, had altered the king's humour as soon as Madame Maintenon had mentioned her name. It might be that the king felt he was being reminded that he was on the verge of sacrificing justice to beauty, or perhaps he felt like a dreamer who, sharply awoken, sees the enchanted images disappear at the moment he thought to grasp them. Perhaps he now no longer saw his Vallière before him, but thought only on Sœur Louise de la Miséricorde, Vallière's name among the cloistered Carmelite nuns, who tormented him with her piety and penance. What else was there to do now but calmly await the king's decision? Count Miasson's statement to the Chambre Ardente had in the meantime become public knowledge, and as the people are easily driven from one extreme to the other, it came about that he who had at first been execrated as the wickedest of murderers and threatened with lynching before he even reached the scaffold was now lamented as the innocent victim of barbaric justice. Only now did the neighbourhood remember his virtuous behaviour, his love for Madelon, the loyalty and devotion of body and soul he showed the old goldsmith. Processions, often in hostile mood, appeared before La Regnier's palace, crying, "Give us Olivier Brousson! He is innocent!" They even threw stones at the window, so that La Regnier was forced to seek protection. Several days passed without Mademoiselle Scudery's hearing anything about Olivier Brousson's case. Disconsolate, she betook herself to Madame Maintenon, who assured her that the king was silent on the matter, and that it did not seem advisable to remind him of it. She then asked, with a strange smile, what the little Vallière was doing, which convinced Mademoiselle Scudery that deep down the proud woman was annoyed at an event which could entice the susceptible king into a sphere whose charm she did not comprehend. From Madame Maintenon, therefore, she could hope for nothing. Finally, with D'Andilly's help, Mademoiselle Scudery discovered that the king had a long private conversation with Count Miasson, that Bontemps, the king's trusted servant and chargé d'affaires, had been to the conciergerie and spoken to Brousson, that finally, one night, the same Bontemps had been to Cardilac's house with several others, and had stayed there a long time. Claude Patru, the occupant of the ground floor, confirmed that there had been noises overheard all night long, and that Olivier had definitely been there with them, for he had clearly recognized his voice. It was thus certain that the king himself was having the case investigated, though the long delay in his decision remained incomprehensible. But La Regnier was doing everything he could to keep his teeth firmly on the sacrifice they were trying to wrest from him, and that fact seemed to blight every hope. Almost a month had passed before Madame Maintenon sent word to Mademoiselle Scudery that the king wished to see her that evening in her, Madame Maintenon's, apartments. Mademoiselle Scudery's heart leapt. She knew that Brousson's case would now be decided. Yet it seemed as if the king had forgotten the whole affair, for lingering as usual in pleasant conversation with Madame Maintenon and Mademoiselle Scudery, he said not a single syllable about poor Brousson. At last Bontemps appeared, approached the king, and spoke a few words so softly that the two women were unable to hear them. Mademoiselle Scudery quaked inwardly. Then the king rose, stepped over to her, and said with eyes beaming, "I wish you joy, mademoiselle. Your protégé, Olivier Brousson, is free." Mademoiselle Scudery, her eyes welling over with tears and incapable of uttering a sound, was about to throw herself at the king's feet, but he prevented her, saying, Now, mademoiselle, you ought to be a lawyer and fight my suits for me, for by Saint-Denis no one on earth could withstand your eloquence. Yet," he continued more seriously, "may he whom virtue itself takes under its protection be no less secure in the face of any evil accusation before the Chambre Ardente or any court in the world." Mademoiselle Scudery now found words, and she poured them forth in glowing gratitude. The king interrupted her, and told her that in her own house she could expect to receive far more ardent thanks than ever he could require from her,
for probably at that very moment the happy Olivier was already embracing his Madelon. Bontemps, the king concluded, shall pay you 1,000 louis to be given to the girl in my name as her dowry. May she wed her Brusson, who certainly does not deserve such good fortune, but then both are to leave Paris. That is my will. Martiniere hurried to meet Mademoiselle De Scudery, Baptiste behind her, both with faces shining with joy, both jubilantly crying, "He's here! He's free! Oh, the lovely young things!" The happy pair threw themselves at Mademoiselle De Scudery's feet. "Oh, I knew that you, and you alone, would be able to save my husband," cried Madelon. "Oh, my faith in you, my mother, is firmly fixed in my soul," cried Olivier, and both kissed the worthy lady's hands and wept 1,000 burning tears. And then they embraced one another again, swore that the heavenly joy of that moment outweighed all the nameless sufferings of the past, and promised not to leave one another until death. A few days later they were united by the blessing of the priest. Even if it had not been the king's will, Brusson could not have been able to stay in Paris, where everything reminded him of the dreadful era of Cardilac's crimes, and where any chance occurrence could reveal his secret, now known to many, and end for ever his life of happiness. Immediately after the wedding, he moved with his young wife, accompanied by Mademoiselle De Scudery's blessings, to Geneva. There, equipped by Madelon's dowry, gifted with rare skill at his craft and with every civic virtue, he led a happy, carefree life. In him the hopes were fulfilled which had deluded his father. A year had passed since Brusson's departure when a public proclamation appeared, signed by Aloy de Chauvelin, Archbishop of Paris, and by the lawyer Pierre d'Arnaud d'Andilly, which stated that a repentant sinner had, under the seal of the confessional, handed over to the church a rich hoard of stolen gems and jewellery. Anyone who had jewellery stolen from him before the end of the year 1680, particularly by murderous attack in the open street, should apply to d'Andilly, and if his description of the jewellery stolen from him coincided with any of the gems found, and providing no doubt was otherwise found in respect of the rightfulness of the claim, the jewellery would be returned. Many who appeared on Cardilac's list presented themselves to the advocate, and, to their no small surprise, received back the jewels that had been stolen from them. What was left fell to the treasury of the church of Saint-Eustache.